Quincy, who was the man who had it built. It's a different type of architecture though. Does it look like anything that you're familiar with? The building? And it would be maybe a Greek temple or a Roman temple or something. That's why it's called Greek Revival architecture. Greek Revival architecture got started, actually it was really started by Thomas Jefferson when he designed the Capitol for Virginia. But it became very, very popular in America after, say, 1820. And all over the South, for example, all those antebellum houses, you know, Tara, Gone with the Wind, all that stuff, those are Greek Revival houses. And the reason it was so popular in this country was because it symbolized where the country had gotten its philosophic foundation. Greece and Rome, these were the birthplaces for democracy and for republic. We were a new, young republic. After the War of 1812, we had totally thrown off the yoke of Britain. And so this was symbolized in the architecture. Three gorgeous buildings from 3 centuries of architecture. We have the old State House, which was built in 1712, 1713. We have the Ames Building, which was built in 1889. And we have 28th State Street, which was built in 1969. So we have 3 centuries of famous buildings without even turning your head. Also, this is a famous site, this general area, not exactly sure which particular spot, because a very famous historical event took place here. But before we talk about that particular event, let's talk a little bit about how Boston got started and what led to the Revolution. Remember, the Puritans came to Boston in 1630. Now, the Puritans were a form, at the time, they were a form of the Anglican Church. The Anglican Church was formed by King Henry VIII because he wanted to divorce his wife, Anne Boleyn. And the Roman Church wouldn't allow him to do that. But to make it palatable to the people of England, you know, people don't like to give up their religion, he wanted to make it so something that they wanted. And the people of England did not like, the majority of the people did not like a church hierarchy which started with a pope in Italy, and then it had a bunch of archbishops, and then it had bishops, and then it had priests, and then it had deacons, and finally you got down to the guy down here at the church. They didn't like that. They wanted to have something that worked just the opposite. They wanted to have a congregation, a minister, that's it. That's why they were called Congregationalists, because they based their entire religion on the congregation. And then there was like a loose association between these congregations so that the dogma didn't get all bent out of shape, but there wasn't this hierarchy coming from the top down. So King Henry agreed with this, but very quickly, what did it do? It reverted. What do we have now? Archbishop of Canterbury, bishops, priests, deacons, and everybody else, right? So the Puritans were the people who said, wait a minute, that's not the way it's supposed to be. We know what the pure religion is, and they were called Puritans. Well, they didn't get along all that well with their Anglican brothers. So, some of them were rather vociferous, and they stirred up trouble, and they were kicked out of England. Those are the Pilgrims. They went to Holland. Somehow they got a charter. They came over to Massachusetts. But there were only a few of them. One boat, the Mayflower, a few of them made it over. Up in Lincolnshire, in England, another group of people who were led by John Winthrop, who was a businessman and a landowner, took a different tack. What they did was they bought into a company. It was called the Massachusetts Bay Company. The Massachusetts Bay Company had a charter from the king. The charter said you can go to the New World and you can be a mining company. I didn't know that. A mining company.
A tiny what?
mining company.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Wasn't it also
Okay.
fur?
What's that?
Wasn't it also fur?
Probably, and anything that goes along. So what they did was, within a year of buying into this company, they did a stock takeover. They took over the company. And as soon as they took over the company, they rewrote the charter. And in the new charter, it said, one, to be a member of this company, you have to be a Puritan. Two, you have to be willing to go to the new world when we come to the new world. Three, we're taking the charter with us so no one can do this again. No changing our charter because it's going to be over there. Plus, they had a couple of concessions. They were able to choose their governor and their governor's council, and then they would send it to the crown to be okay. All of the other charters that were done after that, the king and the parliament appointed the governor and the governor's commission. So when these guys got here, first of all, they were businessmen and landowners, and they had some wealth. Secondly, they knew what they wanted, and they were very independent. And they set up in the Boston Peninsula, the Charlotte Peninsula, which is surrounded by water, and they started a maritime economy. It was based on shipping. What they did was they took the New England produce, which was lumber and codfish, and they would take this lumber and cod to the Caribbean, and they would trade it for sugar. They would bring the sugar back to Boston. Sugar, molasses, the same thing. They would distill it into rum. They would send the rum to Europe, sell the rum by consumer goods, and bring it back to New England and sell the consumer goods. And they became wealthy, very wealthy. And they became very independent and independent-minded. Now, what was going on in England during this time? Well, England went through some hard times. They had a couple of weak kings. Then they had the Cromwellian Revolution, the Protestant Revolution. And then finally, they got a slightly more powerful king. And he started saying, wait a minute. Oh, they also had a war with France that lasted about 10 years. And so they were out of money also. They were poor. So what does a country do that has a colony and they're poor? They send over to the colony and say, you're the colony, you're supposed to support the motherland. And that's what they started doing in the 1760s. 1764, they passed the first law of taxation. Now, we had taxes before. This was the first one that was directed directly at a particular colony. They passed the Sugar Act. Now, who do you think that affected? Massachusetts, remember? Cod and lumber, sugar got. The new act said all sugar is going to be taxed. One. And to be taxed, you have to take the sugar not to Boston. You have to take the sugar to London, have it taxed, and then you can do whatever you want. Well, that was going to screw up everything. I mean, they had this, and that was going to be like this, right? It wasn't going to work. So what did the Bostonians do? Well, they kind of revolted. And after the sugar tax, there was a lot of dissension in Boston. They actually burnt down the inside of the governor's house over in the North End. They just raised a lot of cane. England backed off, and they rescinded the sugar tax within a year. But they didn't give up. They came up with a new tax. New tax was called the Stamp Act. Stamp Act said, anything you want to do, if you want to sell a pack of cigarettes, well, a piece of tobacco, alcohol, you want to sell your property, you want to get married, you want to do anything, it has to have a governmental stamp. Actually, there's a stamp. And you have to pay for that. And that pay is a tax. It's a stamp tax. And once again, what did happen in Boston? In Boston, when they heard about that, they burnt down the Stamp House. and they kidnapped the stamp collector, the tax collector. And within a week, he resigned. So that law didn't last either. They rescinded the Stamp Act. So that was 1765. 1767, they passed the final of the tax laws, which was called the Townshend Act. The Townshend Act says any manufactured goods coming from Europe, coming into the colonies, has to be taxed. Well, the response to that wasn't as violent as the others, but it was the same thing. Now, during this time, the colonies had no say in the English government. We had no representative in Parliament. In 1767-68, there was a massive fire in Boston, one of many. And we sent representatives to Parliament to try to get some aid for rebuilding the town. Not a penny, not a bit of money came this way. So this is when people like James Otis, John Hancock, Sam Adams got together and said, wait a minute, this isn't right. We're paying them money and we're not getting anything in return. As a matter of fact, it was James Otis who said, taxation without representation is tyranny. Okay? So this is where we get to this particular point in time. Now, it comes to be 1770. Right in this area right here, on March 5th, snow on the ground. Now, right over there was a barracks where the soldiers were living. They put soldiers in town after all that violence. Right here was the old State House, which was the seat of government for the colonial government. There's a sun. It's getting to be evening. It's cold, dark. There's a soldier standing there with his rifle. Actually, it's probably a musket. And a young man comes up from Long Wharf, and he accuses this soldier of not paying a bill for the wig he was wearing. Well, they got into some sort of an altercation, and before long, some more people came up from the docks. The soldier got scared, some other soldiers came out of the barracks. Now remember, these soldiers were probably 17, 18 years old. The young guys coming from the docks, they were probably 16 to 18 years old. These were young guys. And it got pretty raucous. And they were throwing snowballs, but they might have had rocks in the middle. So it was maybe a little dangerous. Other people came, and they say it was somewhere 200, 400 people. We don't really know how many people. At some point, someone said fire. There were bells ringing. When bells rang, that meant there was a fire, so maybe they thought there was a fire. Who knows? The British opened fire, and when the smoke had cleared, there were 5 people lying dead in the square. Within a couple of days, there was a broadside, which is a sheet of paper printed with a picture. The picture shows these soldiers standing up at attention in a line, very methodically mowing down the people of Boston. Some of the people are on their knees. There's a little dog over one side. And at the top it says, Boston Massacre. This was the first piece of propaganda for the American Revolution. It went all over the colonies. It went all over Europe. It raised a lot of money. So that was the Boston Massacre. And this general area is where it happened. The marker for the Boston Massacre is right in front of the old State House. So we'll walk by that. But it really happened somewhere about here. Now, before we leave this place, let me just, this is a line. We've been sort of following it all along. We just been crossing over. But this is the actual line of the Freedom Trail. It was established in the 1960s, and originally it was just a paint line. As we've upgraded the sidewalks, we try to make it into a bridge and granite. And it just connects a whole bunch of historical sites, from starting in Bunker Hill and goes all the way to the new State House at the top of the mountain. You have to buy it. You have to, when the ships come with tea, you have to unload them within 30 days. They've got to be December 17th. 3 ships laden with tea lay in the harbor. Sam Adams calls a meeting because they haven't been unloaded. Sam Adams calls a meeting, and they host the meeting here in Old South Meeting House. At the time, the population of Boston was about 16,000. They say 5,000 people showed up for this meeting. Now think about it. 16,000 people, probably 5,000 of them are kids, and another 5,000 are women. It was almost the entire male population of Boston showed up for this meeting. They invited the governor, who lived right here, to come and address the meeting. He refused. So at some point during the meeting, Sam Adams said something to the effect of, "Gentlemen, I fear there's nothing we can do to save this country." And that was a signal for some men outside the building, dressed up as Indians, to go down and throw all that tea in the harbor. That's a Boston Tea Party. Now, remember, that was an act of rebellion. It was an act of treason. We didn't know who these men were for years, and still don't know who all the men who were in the Tea Party. It was such a closely guarded secret, we didn't know who they were. A few came up later that they were, but we're never sure who was in that Tea Party. The other thing about this building, right around the corner is the birthplace of Benjamin Franklin. And he was baptized in this church. So we say that Benjamin Franklin is a Boston boy. Philadelphia keeps saying, "Oh, no, he's a Philadelphian." He went there as a teenager, so we know where he was really from. Here, Ben Franklin. Any questions? Okay, we're going to go up to Old South Church, Old City Hall. Well, that's because there's a new City Hall, there's a new State House, and there's a new Old South Church. So we like to keep the old and the new. That wasn't always the case. This building was built from 1861 to about 1865, which was the height of the Civil War. So while the South was really undergoing economic hardship, we were able to build this beautiful building here in Boston. You'll notice that it's a very ornate building. The style is called Second Empire, French Second Empire. It's not a copy, but it's modeled after the Louvre in Paris. It has double columns, everything shoots up, very ornate. It has a mansard roof, it's a roof that goes up and then up again. This was the height of fashion in the 60s. It was also the height of fashion in Europe. So by that point, we were no longer 50 or 60 years behind the country. We were right up. Everything that we were doing was just right in style. Over here we have a donkey. That's because Boston is a Democratic town. We've had only one Republican mayor in the last 100 years. However, if you look down in front of that donkey, there's a little plaque down there. There's some footprints, and in each footprint is an elephant. And so the opposition can stand in opposition to the Democrats, showing that we may be Democratic, but we're fair. This guy up here, that's Josiah Quincy III, the guy who did Quincy Martin, and Benjamin Franklin, good old Ben. We're looking at the back of King's Chapel here. King's Chapel was the first Anglican church in Boston. But remember, to own land in Boston, you had to be a Puritan. They had a problem. They weren't Puritans, they were Anglicans. So how were they going to build a church? The way they did it was they confiscated the land. Right? Eminent domain. What was here was Boston Latin School. They forced Boston Latin School to move across the street. Boston Latin School is the oldest public school in the United States. It was formed in 1635, and it was free to all young men in Boston, citizens of Boston. It still exists. It's an exam school. You have to take an exam to get in, and it's moved 2 or 3 times since then. Okay?